Why don't you go ahead and start? Loretta Smith, please introduce yourself. Tell us what you're running for. Give us a real brief bio. No, you're muted now, Commissioner. The mute did work, so go ahead and unmute.
Hi, thank you for interviewing us. My name is Loretta Smith. I am running for Portland City Council, District 2. And just a little bit about myself, the reason why I'm running. The reason why I'm running is because I want to continue serving the folks that I've served for so many years. I've been a public servant for over 20 years of my life. First as a aide to U.S. Senator Ron Wyden, and then as a commissioner on the Multnomah County Commission. And, you know, Portland has changed a lot. Portland has changed from the time that I used to come to Portland and visit my grandparents and my dad. Everything is so expensive. And the reason why I'm running is because I want to make sure that we deal with the issue of poverty, that we deal with those issues that that make us understand, why are people homeless and houseless? Why are people rent burdened? Why can't folks purchase homes? So for me, I want to make sure that every person who lives in Portland has an ability to thrive and to live in a city that I think is just great and wonderful.
Okay, great. Dan Ryan, you go next, please. Dan Ryan, can you go next, please? You're muted, Dan.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Dan. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dan Ryan. I'm running for City Council Position 2. I am born and raised here. I'm the youngest of 8. I'm happily partnered right now with Amo Reyes. It's hopefully third time is a charm. I love my hometown. Best way for me to describe that was when the first time I skipped school was freshman year of high school, and it was when the Blazers won the championship. It was in 1977. It's just a memory that keeps the love going in my heart years later. I moved to New York City after college, after University of Oregon. I did some time there. I was at New School University. I then relocated to Seattle, Washington, where I had the blessing of working at the Pacific Science Center and also Virginia Mason Medical Center. It was in 1995 that I got some bad news. I was told after having pneumocystis pneumonia twice that my chances were maybe 6 months to a year to live, so I came home. And when I got home, about 6 months into it, 3 months into it, the new drugs came out and the cocktails. And the good news is 3 months later, I was able to suit up and really be active in my hometown again. I worked at Portland State. I served on the Portland Public School Board. I was at the Oregon Ballet Theater. And then I became the CEO of All Hands Raised. In all, it's 35 years of nonprofit experience in the fund development and executive roles. And basically after Nick passed away, a lot of people knocked, and they knocked because they wanted a mission-driven person who wasn't a career politician, that knew how to build bridges, that knew how to get results, that was accountable. And I think that our city had 3 big crises prior to this: COVID-19, transportation, housing, and homelessness. And now we have COVID-19, and here we are. And it's really time to just bring in someone that can work from day one to think out of the box and make sure that we have community-driven solutions as we come out on the other side.
Great, thank you. Julia DeGraw.
All right, hello, and thank you so much for the opportunity to participate in this interview process. Again, my name is Julia DeGraw, and I'm running for Portland City Council Position 2. I might be familiar to some folks. I ran for this seat 2 years ago on a system change platform. So a lot of what I'm running on this time is the same issues. To give a little bit more background about myself, I have a 15-year career in the nonprofit sector, 9 of which was spent at Food and Water Watch, where I led the campaign to keep a Nestle water bottling facility out of the Columbia River Gorge, which included passing a ballot measure in Hood River County that officially made commercial water bottling illegal. I also did a lot of work at the local level, especially regarding water protection, and had some experience giving invited testimony on water issues to the Water Bureau and to the City Council during the time that Commissioner Nick Fish was overseeing the Water Bureau, which actually was one of the major reasons that inspired me to run for this seat. and that first time around. And the other thing that really inspired me to run was the fact that we need real system change in order to solve our big systemic problems, our housing crisis, the traffic issues we're facing, the climate crisis. I've been making the case since I ran for office the last time in 2018 that we need to change the commission form of government to come up with a form of government that has more professional leadership, and most importantly, frankly, elect city council members by district so we can have representation from every part of the city, and have commissioners who are city council members who are responsible for constituency services and developing future thinking policies that are collaborative with each other, the bureaus, and other jurisdictions to solve these big systemic problems together. In my 15-year career, I focused most of my energy on coalition building and coalition management. I really was only as strong as the coalition I could build, which meant I got to keep a lot of people at the table with their eye on the prize. And I think that's a skill that's really needed on council at this time. And I think it's one of the biggest reasons I got the endorsement of Joanne Hardesty for this race. So that's why I'm running.
Great, thank you, Margot.
Command D. My name is Margot Black. I'm running for Portland City Council, seat number 2. A little bio about me. I am a renter. I'm a mother of 3. My first was born when I was a 19-year-old single mother, recently effectively orphaned, and I have a 10 and 12-year-old sons. I have a 15-year background teaching college-level mathematics, a master's degree in math. I'm a community organizer. I helped found Portland Tenants United in 2015, which is an all-volunteer tenants union that has really kind of led and driven and been at the forefront of the housing justice conversation in the last 5 years. And I've had kind of a tough life. I was born into the foster care system to a mother who was incarcerated and institutionalized for most of my life. I was raised by my grandmother who died shortly 6 weeks after my daughter was born. Had a no-cause eviction a few months after that, which really was a time in my life where things could have gone this way or that way, and I was certainly on the express train to poverty through that no-cause eviction and displacement, and only because a friend who was working at Intel at the time and had a big house and no family let me live with him to get myself back on my feet, which is where I stayed for 4 years without paying rent and utilities. Was I able to right my own ship, go to college, go to graduate school, and that helped me understand, especially in future housing instability, times in my life with housing instability, the transformational power of stable housing for an individual and for our communities. That's one of the reasons why I'm running. So I mentioned that I've been organizing for 5 years. That was really my first foray into local politics. I've been kind of an activist since high school. I've done lots of marching in the streets, and I did a little bit of advocacy when I was an adjunct at University of Oregon to get Portland Employee Benefits Boards to restore some maternity care benefits when they switched to a self-pay system. But I've really most of my political experience has been in the realm of housing justice, tenants' rights, homelessness, affordable housing. And in the process of that work, some of which has been through direct action and activism, some has been through coalition level advocacy, and some has been direct policy work with Commissioner Udaley's office, Commissioner Hardesty's office, the mayor's office, Commissioner Fish's office before he passed away, as a commissioner on the Rental Services Commission. I've really seen who gets left behind and why, and I've really seen how much work, what we could be doing, but we aren't because of lack of political will and courage, but also because of business as usual at City Hall. This is the way we've always done things. This is the way we do things. But most importantly, because we don't have the voices around the table of the people who really are most directly impacted by these issues. And In my case, I see the absolute consequences, the consequences of not having more renters, low income renters at the table talking about those issues. But it's
okay. Let me stop you there. Let me stop you there. Let's give Sam a chance.
Sure.
Sam Chase.
Thank you, Sam Chase, Portland City Council candidate. And these are incredibly serious times, and we need leaders with experience that will really, deliver on rebuilding our economy out of this pandemic, addressing the major issues around poverty in our city, affordable housing and other job creation, getting our parks sustained and back on to being a gem for our city, addressing transportation, reforming our council government structure. I am somebody who has a deep level of commitment to working on poverty for my entire adult life. I've worked in the nonprofit and coalition building sector as an affordable housing nonprofit builder, as an advocate to win and build a coalition, 1,000 people and organizations strong, Affordable Housing Now, to majorly reform our urban renewal so that we had the 30% set aside of all affordable housing dedicated. That's why Nick Fish brought me on as his chief of staff to help him put forward his agenda around addressing poverty. And I brought that agenda to Metro, where I was able to bring the entire council and region on board for a regional affordable housing strategy and more. And it's not just about winning those resources. It's about major structural reform at the regional level to say, look, Portland's not going to solve this all on its own. We have 25 cities and counties now that are participating in addressing this crisis that we have around affordable housing. The folks that were standing up and fighting affordable housing a number of only 10 years ago are now vociferously fighting to build affordable housing in Hillsborough, in Beaverton, in Clackamas County. So bringing that experience and leadership to be able to get things done is what I think City of Portland needs right now. And we have a lot of big, very serious issues to tackle in front of us.
Great. Thank you, Tara Hurst.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for putting this on and figuring out how we do these things in this time. My name is Tara Hurst. I'm the candidate for Portland City Council, position 2. And a bit about myself. My story really does start when I was about 19. I had hit my rock bottom from drugs and alcohol. I was completely spinning out of control. And, my mom had told me that she didn't think I would live to see my 20th birthday. So right before that, I found myself in my friend's car. She was driving me around all night to make sure that I stayed awake until we got a detox bed. I knew that if I went to bed that night, I would not have the courage to get clean the next day. And I probably would have not made it to my 20th birthday. So that's really kind of where my story starts in many ways. And so I did make it to detox and was fortunate enough to get to go to treatment. The first treatment didn't take, so I was sent to South Florida for a longer term treatment and spent 12 years in Florida. Started, like many people in recovery, waiting tables and cleaning houses. And my biggest ambition at that point really was to live in one of the apartments in the apartment buildings that I was cleaning, because it felt like probably the best thing that could ever happen. I was waiting tables and getting harassed on a daily basis by my boss. And so what I took kind of a ticket out of there by answering a classified ad in the paper that was I didn't know it at the time, but ended up being a car sales job at a Chevrolet dealership. And so I sold cars I worked my way up through the car dealership. I think I was about 21 at the time. And sold cars, then ended up worked my way up and became the general sales manager at the end, and ran a multi-million-dollar business. I knew that I didn't want to live in South Florida and raise my son in South Florida. So I fell in love with Portland, and we moved our family here. We actually moved right in the recession. So it was a hard start in Portland, but I'm ever grateful that we were able to stay and stick it out. I don't have family here. So I went to Portland State and got my bachelor's in social work. And that really is what put me on the trajectory for political life, I guess. I wanted to see what it was like to, if you really could make change in government. And so I was a legislative intern for the National Association of Social Workers. It was part of my placement. We had to do 500 hours. And so I lobbied in Salem for the social workers, among other groups, and really saw that you could make changes and you could impact people's lives through policy. I was, a little jaded, not thinking that that was actually a thing that could happen, and it was. And we worked on some really tough issues, and that inspired me to continue down that path. I was a community organizer for Basic Rights Oregon. And then, started working for a legislator, ran a campaign, and then got recruited to work in City Hall. And I worked for Charlie Hales and his Mayor Hales and his administration. I was his deputy chief of staff, and then became his chief of staff, where we did a lot of, really great things. And I managed a pretty large staff and managed some of the bureaus and helped run our city. After his administration ended, I became the executive director for Renew Oregon, which is the largest climate coalition in the state. We're over 60 organizations, 230, I think, farms and ranches, 800 businesses, and had a steering committee to make sure that it really represented the breadth and the perspective of Oregonians, and we push for climate solutions. And obviously, most people know that the legislature was not successful in passing those, but we were able to get the most ambitious climate action done just about a month ago through an executive order through the governor. So, I'm running for multiple reasons. Things have changed a lot in the last couple of weeks, and our crises are just getting bigger. I have the leadership and the experience to tackle big issues. I've been going after the most well-funded opposition for the last 3.5 years. I'm not afraid of fighting for my son's future and fighting for the rest of our futures. So that's why I'm running. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Great, thank you. So there are a lot of you, and while we know you, most voters may not know some of you. I'd like you each to tell us the single most meaningful endorsement that you have, and don't cheat and say, well, actually there are 2 or there are 5. Tell us the most meaningful endorsement you have and why it is meaningful. We'll go first to you, Tara.
I'm used to doing sorry. I've been thinking about this. I would say that actually it's the one that I got yesterday or the day before. The days are all kind of smushing together these days. From the National Association of Social Work. As I just said in my story, I started my path with social work. It's how I found that I could go back to college and actually be a student. I almost failed out of high school and passed out on my graduation stage. So for me, being able to go to college and find social work was really, it changed my life. Kind of like how, Margot, when you were sharing your story, that there are those paths and there's those moments. And that was one of those moments for me. So having their endorsement really matters. It's personal. So
Great.
that was great.
Okay, Sam?
Can't hear you.
This is a tough one. I'll repeat to the one that comes to mind that is very important to me is Apano's endorsement. And I think that surprised a lot of folks, but it is really because I feel it is, it's so important to insist on inclusion and culturally specific communities being a part of the decision-making and truly empowering communities in the decision-making process. And my commitment at Metro has been really targeted at leading with race and making sure that we are empowering and putting systems in place that really engage culturally specific communities and others in our decision-making. And we have done it in a way that has truly reformed how we go about decision-making at Metro and has truly empowered and invested in organizations to have the capacity, not just for those individuals to participate in our inclusion work, but to have their entire communities and organizations really have the resources to do that. So that's been tremendously, meaningful to me. And that is something that, is very important. I'll bring to the city of Portland those systems as well.
Did Metro give Apano money for their new headquarters?
Oh, we invested yes, we've invested in.
How much? How much?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know that amount off the top of my head. We've done a tremendous number of things to invest in Apano and culturally specific communities throughout the region, and not just Apano.
Okay. Great. Okay. Commissioner Smith.
Thank you. I think the most valued endorsement would have to be Senator Wyden. And I asked him, why do you keep endorsing me? And he said, because you started with me as a receptionist right out of college. You're the first person in your family to go to college. You engulfed yourself into the community. You fought hard for different constituencies. And you supported our private relief bill that I had no idea what I was doing before you brought it to my attention, where we got someone, Marina Kalina, who came over here from the former Soviet Union, and her husband, her American husband, she was experiencing horrible domestic violence. And we got her a private relief bill. So for me to be able to have an opportunity to work with different groups and coalitions to bring resources into the community, he thought that was great and appreciated. And when I went over to the county, nothing changed. I put together a coalition. When I heard that the communities of color, they were concerned about high school graduation rates. And as a result, I put together what had never been done before, general fund monies for the coalition of color to help with graduation rates. And $2 million in the permanent budget. And we worked on this over the course of three years. But that has never happened before, to be able to give wraparound supports for at-risk youth. And then the third thing that I think he was very happy about.
I'm going to stop you there. I'm going to stop you there. We're getting a little far afield from that answer, and we got 6 of us. So let's go to Margot Black. Most important endorsement that you have.
Well, so I am a kind of a different kind of candidate, and not one that a political class tends to line up behind. So I would say that, so I haven't been part of any endorsement process that is truly democratic or membership driven in terms of the folks it represents. So the endorsements that are most valuable to me are the ones from the folks who have never voted before. Felons who didn't even realize they could vote, people who didn't even know that there was somebody like me running for city council who actually, was living the struggle with them, and those personal endorsements. I think, to give you a better answer, I've been endorsed by Our Revolution, and I think that lines up very well with that.
What is Our Revolution?
Our Revolution is the organization that was formed in the kind of in the end or in the wake of Bernie Sanders' 2016 presidential campaign, that said that the revolution needs to continue, and that it's not me, it's us, and that really we need bottom-up grassroots power of the people to be in power. And yeah.
Okay, excellent. Julia?
All right. So I mentioned one endorsement during my intro that I'm very proud of. So I'm going to go with an organizational endorsement for this answer. I think if I were to pick one, I'm going to go with AFSCME, which is the union that represents the public workers at the city of Portland. AFSCME Local 189. Decided to stick their neck out in this very deep race, this very crowded race, to make an endorsement of me. And I think it really speaks to the fact that I really earnestly sought every endorsement I could possibly get in the 2018 race. And I had a very strong pro-worker platform, and I've continued to build those relationships with unions the entire 2 years since then. And they have a very democratic process, and I think there was no guarantee they were even going to endorse in this race, or if they were going to pick just one. And I feel really good to know that the workers of this city trust me to be on their side and make sure that they have the support that they need to do their jobs.
So just as I asked Sam about whether Metro supported Apano, I need to ask you, don't you have a personal connection to a senior AFSCME official?
We were partners with AFSCME, was one of the organizations that was in the coalition to keep Nestle out of the gorge. So I have pre-existing relationships with several people who work at AFSCME or are leaders in the union.
Well, is there something more than that?
Which are you talking about?
Is Michael Hanna your partner still?
Oh yes, Michael Hanna is definitely my partner. He's not engaged in a leadership level at the union anymore. He's a union steward, I think. But yes, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that was a question.
Okay.
I'm friends with a lot of folks at AFSCME.
Okay, all right, Dan Ryan.
Yeah, I'm going to go with an individual, Sarah Mensah. Sarah Mensah hired me when I became the CEO of All Hands Raised. It was called the Portland Schools Foundation then. It was a mess. We had quite a deficit, and we had to build it from the ashes. And what I appreciate about Sarah Mensah, who at that time was the COO of the Portland Trail Blazers and now an executive at Nike, is that she thought out of the box with me, and we were able to repurpose the organization so it was so it had impact, so it was relevant. We were able to expand from just Portland public schools to all of the school districts in the city of Portland. And it was very important for people to understand that most of our kids in poverty are east of PPS, and that's a part of our city. And we also were able to work with the community to not accept the high school graduation rates at their current level. And we therefore built a new table. But in order to do that, we had to blow up a couple tables. We were able to negotiate and let go of the Leaders Roundtable. We were able to let go of the Mayor's Education Task Force. They were two meetings that didn't have any impact, and it's kind of the same people moving deck chairs around, meeting at the same times. And so we built an organization that was about looking at the metrics, about testing practices at work, admitting that some don't, and then scale up the ones that do. And more importantly, it was about bringing different constituents together, not just educators, they can't do it alone, but bring in business, bring in the trades, bring in, of course, the nonprofits, but not have the meeting be a transactional meeting about who's getting the contract and therefore kiss the ring of the elected official that gives you that contract. Instead, it were meetings where we had a lot of creative tension. We had to be humble about how hard this was to do, but with a steady focus and with transparency, we saw movement, and we saw increases in graduation rates, both for all children at 11.5%, but more importantly, because we had a racial equity focus and we prioritized those populations, we saw additional 5% increase for African-American students and with Latino students. So I'm very proud that Sarah Mensah saw me and that she worked with me and that we remain close to this day. And it's people that are fueling this campaign.
Okay, so I would like you all now to tell us about a mistake that you've made that would inform the way you would conduct yourself if you win this office. So a specific mistake, and please don't tell us that you worked too hard or that you cared too much or that you love little animals too passionately. Tell us a legitimate mistake you've made and how it will affect your ability to be a city commissioner? Margot Black.
What a great question, Nigel. Let's see. Well, when I look at the last 5 years of advocacy and organizing that I've done in PTU, and it has not been without controversy and hurdles. I think that probably I guess it's a mistake in one way. It was a very hard, painful learning experience mostly. And as a math teacher, that's just how I think of mistakes, is what can we learn? When the legislature was working on House Bill 2004 back in 2017, which started as a very strong bill. It had everything we wanted in it. And as it, went through the process, it got predictably whittled down to the point where, after the last Senate amendments, it came to the point where Portland Tenants United could no longer support it as is. And we had done our homework in terms of really making sure that we understood what was, what the problems with the bill were, and we were not an official member of the Stable Homes Coalition that had formed at the time. But we were definitely collaborating and really kind of participating as the left flank. And so when we decided to withdraw our support from the bill, we didn't, let me see. I do not regret withdrawing our support from the bill, and I do not regret doing that in a public way, and I do not regret the reasons we did it. I very much regret the way that all happened. Communication could have been a lot better. I personally could have been tremendously more sensitive to the feelings of the people from the Stable Homes Coalition that were involved. I can be a little, and especially in these very tense political moments where I see that if we go this, we can go this way or that way, and if we go that way, then it's the wrong choice and the consequences are going to be real big and bad. I can get a little intense, and the combination of the stress of the legislative cycle and the feelings involved and the people involved and the backgrounds of the organizations involved, I think myself and PTU definitely kind of acted like we were the smartest people in the room and we can do whatever we want and who cares what the consequences were. And I really, that has fractured some relationships that I'm still rebuilding. And it caused a lot of confusion in the community because Community Alliance of Tenants was still supporting and we weren't, and neither group was in a position to really shepherd.
Okay, so that was your mistake. So how's it going to affect you as a city council member?
Well, it's affected my pace of the policy work and the communication, and not feeling like every do or die moment has to that we have to light everything on fire or take the hardest line. I'm much, much, much better at coalition building, managing expectations, communicating with everybody, building consensus, and really just understanding the feelings and the backgrounds of the people and the organizations and the work they've done before, and how that is going to be part of a collaborative part of the process.
Okay, great. Dan Ryan, mistake you've made. Let's try and speed these up a little bit.
All right. So I'm thinking about when I was on the school board as an elected official, seems relevant. And it was a vote I made when Vicki Phillips was the superintendent. There were a lot of K-8 changes taking place. And I stood my ground on principle for most of the votes. And there was one where I caved into a lot of pressure from people that were part of that parent community. And anyway, I did an exclusionary vote for 1K8. And it was right after the vote where my gut just didn't feel right. And I remember, I just know that I have to live with myself and I have to sleep well at night. And it was the only time when I was on the school board where I doubted that. And one reason I haven't been aggressive about getting group endorsements or special interest endorsements is because I really want to serve with my eyes wide open and be a leader for so many of the people that represent this beautiful city. And I find that the purity of ideology is so in the way of this city moving forward for the last 10 years. And now with COVID, we just don't have time for that BS. And I really look forward to serving and looking at the priorities and staying focused on them. And I really believe that one experience I had, I know after that, I never experienced that again. And I want to go into this position day one, feeling like I am in integrity with all of my decisions.
Great. Tara, what's the mistake you made?
Yeah, I've been running through all of them. I mean, I've been trying to run through all of them. There is a lot. My life is a lot of making mistakes and then picking yourself up and learning from them. I think one that's relevant to this, and it may sound kind of wonky, when I first became the Deputy Chief of Staff to Mayor Hales, it was my work to look at his calendar and figure out which meetings, how to loosen up his calendar so he could actually get out into the community more. And I was I was really new to City Hall. And I decided that we needed to take all of the standing meetings off his calendar. And we would only have meetings if we had a reason and there was a purpose for them, which I think in theory makes sense. And it made sense at the time. But what it ended up doing, and I can get a little stubborn, what it ended up doing is creating a lot of friction in the second floor, and probably wasn't worth the fights that ended up ensuing from that. And that was a mistake. That was me kind of walking in, not knowing exactly what the impact would be. And I spent a lot of time repairing those relationships and went back to probably having more standing meetings than we should have. I still don't agree with standing meetings necessarily, but that being said, I think that was a mistake that I won't make walking in this time around as a commissioner. The relationships are really critical. They are really important. And to me, the only way you can really maintain relationships, even if you don't think there's an agenda item, sitting down and talking with folks, usually you find agenda items and you find things that you need to talk through, and it's worthwhile time, and that's time well spent. So that's one of, many.
Okay, great. Sam?
Thank you. From the very long list of mistakes is one I think of actually quite a lot is advocating for the real estate transfer tax in the 90s. It is absolutely for affordable housing. It's absolutely great policy. It was the right thing. It was something we all needed. And I was a co-leader in the legislature moving that forward for a couple of sessions. And even though it was the right policy, we were feeling proud that we had gotten from 13 legislators overall supporting it to 17 out of the entire body. We kept pushing that one solution forward. And at the end of the day, we were getting results for nobody that was facing there was still housing crisis back then. So really then from that, understanding that we have to build menus of options and policy system change options to move forward. And once we moved away from it has to be the real estate transfer tax or nothing, we were able to get an explosion of good policy passed in the legislature. And so, it really taught me a lot in terms of including other folks in owning solutions.
Okay, great. Commissioner Smith?
Yes, thank you. When I think about this, one of the biggest mistakes that I made, I believe Willamette Week did a story about a couple of my staffers who felt that they were being bullied. And I made the bad mistake of just not immediately apologizing. I should have just immediately apologized and did what my mother taught me to do and not listen to consultants and just say, look, I am so, so sorry. And it was never meant, any of my behavior was never meant to make anyone feel bad or to bully them in any kind of way. And, you know, and then going forward, I think that I have a tendency to mother folks. And so having a lot of young, bright people on my staff, I mother them. And so maybe, you know, not being such a mother, but just being a legislator. And now going forward, I want all of my staff, whether it be the bureaus or my personal staff, if they feel like I'm pushing too hard, because I know I can push and be so passionate about helping the most vulnerable in our community and fighting for communities of color, sometimes my passion is seen as something else. And I want to give young women and men of color the same opportunity that I got from Senator Wyden. He didn't have anybody of color in his office before I got there. And I wanted to make sure that I gave them that same kind of training and commitment and dedication. And, you know, I'm a person who's known to be someone who doesn't take no for an answer. And that take no for an answer kind of attitude, sometimes it rubs people the wrong way, especially when you're in a foxhole and you're trying to fight for resources and policies. And so I just want to say again, Nigel, thank you for asking that question. I sincerely apologize and have never meant to make anyone feel bad, because I'm always going to fight for my community and try to get as many resources as I can. So thank you for that.
Okay, Julia.
All right, I had to think about this one a lot as well. I had a kind of a personal growth one that was like a series of like making the same kind of small mistake over and over again required me to change my habits. That was going to be my initial answer, but I realized that let's pick a real like mistake. So the mistake that I made was it was, I believe, when I was actually still campaigning, or recently after I was campaigning for the seat in 2018. I was talking with the folks at Portland, the Portland Association of Teachers, and they wanted folks to show up and testify to defend resources for special needs students. And I have zero regrets about showing up to testify. That was absolutely the right thing to do. It was an important issue. What I wish I had done, and the mistake that I made, was I had relationships with some of the folks that were on the Portland Public School Board, where we were showing up to give testimony. And I should have checked in with those people before I wrote my testimony and before I showed up that day to kind of, you know, breathe fire at them. Because the Portland Public School Board is stuck between a rock and a hard place when it comes to funding and limited resources. And as much as I absolutely will fight for teachers and students, I will go to the floor for them every time. I want to also be respectful of the folks that are being forced to make these really challenging decisions. And it may not have, maybe I would have learned something and I would have added some nuance and detail to my testimony that wasn't there because I didn't have those conversations. Maybe I wouldn't have changed anything that I'd done, but they would have at least had the heads up that I was going to do this and that I want to support them and making these difficult and figuring out how to, you know, use what limited resources they have in what I would view as a better way, right? But I should have absolutely reached out to the folks who were on the receiving end of what I was going to be saying on a one-on-one basis to be really upfront with them and build those relationships as well. And I am fully aware that we're not always going to agree on everything, but we have shared values, and we should always have open lines of communications with folks, whether or not we're in lockstep with all of our beliefs and even though we might have a different idea of what the solutions are, you should always be forthright with folks that you're going to, you know, be making decisions with and who are serving the public. We have to have good functional relationships with each other in order to create the change that needs to happen for the city.
Great, thank you. So I'd like you all now just to take, I want you to be as brief as you can. I want you to describe to us one specific action you would like to take if you're elected that would address a shortcoming you currently see. So we're not going to solve housing in one fell swoop, but we might be able to stop sending fire trucks with 4 firefighters to routine medical calls. some specific policy action that you would like to take or work on immediately upon being elected. Again, please be brief. We will start this time with Margot Black.
I don't know how to pick just one. Okay. I think that especially with regards to our current state of affairs in Corona, I would immediately get to work on championing a corporate income tax and a wealth tax to aggressively bring in the revenue that we need in order to address the myriad issues that this city will face. And I think, if I may, I think the first thing I would like to use that and other revenue for that is going to be coming forth is to essentially create a statewide, maybe we start at the city level, but then statewide entitlement system for housing vouchers. I mean, I just think everybody, nobody should be paying more than a certain percent of their income in rent, and everybody should have a voucher that the government picks up the rest of the tab. And I think that'll work to help drive down prices, but it'll get folks off the street. And I think that the revenue is there. We just need to have the courage to get it.
Great. Sam Chase, one specific thing you would do.
Well, I think I will pick the housing issue here, which is a complex myriad of different things that need to happen. But I would focus one area on cost saving. I'm really concerned about the cost of housing and building out the supply of housing. We have a lot of work to do, and there are real options that we can move forward to reduce costs. So I would put together a strategy and based on inclusion, including people in participating in what are the strategies we want to aggressively move forward to reduce costs of housing. There are significant things we can do around reducing the financing and the complexity of financing, around advancing SRO housing and much more cost-effective co-op kinds of housing, and the residential infill costs in streamlining. I have a realistic plan to actually streamline some of the permitting processes. So it would be a very targeted effort to move very quickly in addressing the supply issue. We are falling back 20% every year in terms of growth versus the production of housing. We have a major supply problem. So that's one area of many, but that's one area I would be very assertive quickly on.
Great. Julia?
All right, so my answer is I'm going to try to stick with something that is actionable, hopefully, over a short period of time, and that's related to the pandemic crisis that we're facing right now, and that is not going to be a short-lived experience. And I think it'll have far-reaching effects on housing and other issues because it has to do with staffing. I think that the city is going to be stuck with making some really hard decisions about how to especially keep staffing up in places like the Parks Department. So something I wanted to do regardless of this pandemic crisis was really look at the staff to management ratios at the city of Portland. There are a lot of managers to number of workers. And one of the ways that we can make sure that we can support the existing workers and possibly even hire more in areas that need it, like the housing, the Joint Office of Housing Services or Homeless Services is frankly needs more staff. And I think that if we get really serious about looking at staff to management ratios and getting that more under control, you'll free up money to support existing staff and possibly expand staff and keep staff you were thinking about laying off because of issues associated with this pandemic crisis. So I view that worker issue as one that doesn't just apply solely to the workers you're helping. It actually will help us solve these other problems like housing.
Great. Tara?
It's a good question. I'm racking my brain. So I think there's a couple things. One, now that we're in this pandemic, my answer is probably changing. One thing that, I want to do right away that is actionable, and hopefully it gets done before we even get to office, but I think that we need to convene the table of philanthropy, big business, and Portlanders with means, and tap deeper into our general fund reserves that are set up just exactly for what we're going through right now, which is an emergency appropriation and recession, and work on both keeping our staff, but also opening up small businesses as quick as possible so that we are getting people back to work and employing them. If that's not already happening, then that would be my actionable thing when I get in. Obviously, we don't know which bureaus we would be getting, but I would, the other thing that I would do is one of the last things I did with the Hales administration was creating the Kenton Women's Village and helping that get off the ground. And we don't have that. We haven't done that has not been done since. And I think that we should be doing at least, replicating that across the city and making sure that we know what the formula is that works, and we should be doing it all over our city. And I would be willing to say that I would want to do, 5 to 10 at first in the first year. We have the services, we know it needs to be done, and that's what I would be working on. And it would depend on bureau, but we would have land, and most of the bureaus have the city land and own the land that we could actually do it on.
Okay, Loretta?
Thank you. I think the first thing that I would do that I think is actionable, and I would grandfather the current police staff, but I would require Portland Police to live in the city. And I'm saying this from a standpoint of a single mom who raised a son in this community. I don't think we can change the addresses of those folks who live outside of Portland right now. But going forward with our new recruits, have that be a requirement. And the reason why, I think that would help in building our community policing efforts. Because if you know, my son's name is Jordan, but my son got pulled over driving my car for the first time when he was a teenager. And he was scared to death, and he still has a trauma around police. But I think if you live next door to people, and they have to be law enforcement, and you live down the street and oh, that's just Jordan down the street. That's Loretta's son. That's Loretta's car. Instead of that, someone pulling him over saying, why are you driving this expensive car? And he was around the corner from his house, and he called me to come and get him. And he's still, shaken up from that. So I think from a community policing effort, that would help and go a long way if people saw you. Do you remember when Chief Moose used to live over here on Going and MLK? Man, that meant so much to see your police chief right here in your community. And so I want to get back to that.
Okay. Great, Dan Ryan.
Yeah, COVID-19 is going to force us to radically change the way we operate our $5.5 billion city organization. It's really been pretty broken for a while. So this is an opportunity, in my opinion, to just act as if the commission form of government, the bureau form of silos is blown up. And as a team, we all really define what our focus is, what are essential services, how are we going to make sure that this test of humanity is successful, and that Portland leads the way in the nation on how we make sure people are sheltered and people are getting their food, and that we come together, not just at the city, but also at the county, instantly start looking at where our two budgets overlap and how we can get more efficient and survive this. And I think the group that was called out by another opponent was the small businesses. This is a small business city. It always has been. And if 30 to 50% of those don't come back, we're screwed. And so we have to figure out how to radically rethink the loans, and maybe it's just a forgiveness. And we have a blue ribbon panel that really focuses on ensuring that the designers, that the restaurants, that you name a small business, that's what this town is, even small business manufacturers, that they are equipped to come back and employ the people that live in the city where most people work. And that's where our revenue streams come from. So if we don't take care of the private sector, small businesses in the same passion that Margot has been defending renters, we're only doing half of the equation.
Great. Okay. one of the things that we look for in a candidate is independence. And I'm guessing that the 6 of you agree on almost every issue, every substantive issue that would come before the council. So help us understand how you are a more independent person and won't cave into pressure, as Dan said he did on the school board in one instance. Give us an example of how you've demonstrated independence in the past. Sam Chase, let's start with you.
Well, a couple of things I think of at Metro. As you know, Metro can be a place that is very consensus oriented. I stood up and I think I have the most, independent votes there, and including really standing up and saying we absolutely have to fight for ongoing money out of the VDF to provide support services, the Visitor Development Fund. Standing up just this spring and advocating to forward the Here Together Coalition's initiative to the ballot at the full funding that is necessary to actually solve and address this. That was a very significant divergence. I was the only one on council that spoke to really pushing for that. In both of those cases, I was the lone vote against. Council came around later and went in the direction that I advocated in both of those situations. So it was an example of leadership that I think we need when you know and in your heart that something is the right direction. You have to stick with that and keep advocating for that. At the same time, being respectful, but willing to stand up and take those hits.
Okay, great. Tara, an example of your independence?
I guess I would say that my career has a lot of those examples. And right now, as an executive director of a climate coalition who used to sell cars, a lot of the work that I do is compromise in terms of let's figure out what our values and the impacts and the outcomes are that we want to achieve. And let's push forward as hard as we possibly can to get those. And that doesn't always create friends on either side. It's no surprise to y'all that the work that we've been doing at Renew hasn't been beloved by the far left, and definitely hasn't been beloved by industry and the oil companies. But it was something that we kept our eye on the ball on. What are the things that we think are the most important, and what do we need to do? And that was focusing on making sure that our investments were going to our most impacted communities, and not just some investments, but the majority of investments, that tribal sovereignty was acknowledged, and that it was going to actually reduce climate pollution according to science. And that's, that was not a popular stand for the last 3.5 years. And our team and our steering committee has been on a small island sometimes. And I've fought against in rooms with pushing back on the governor, pushing back on the speaker, pushing back on the Senate president.
Can you be more specific? So where was something where you had to give up something that your supporters really liked?
Well, I think that we had to give up. We gave up. It depends. So on the environmental side, a lot of folks did not like the idea of putting a price on carbon. So you're giving up or doing a market-based system. They prefer a tax, or people wanted just direct regulation. So the fact that we were pushing a market-based system in a city like Portland, but recognizing that we needed to do a full statewide program and a statewide push is it's a different animal.
Okay, great. Dan Ryan, independence?
Yeah. At All Hands Raised, as we kept going deeper into the partnership, we started engaging more and more of the people on the ground. So we started testing practices with teachers and counselors and social workers from our culturally specific organizations. And there were some of the practices that were bubbling up that were having success that some of the people at the top of the bureaucracy, if you will, it wasn't their top-down way of wanting to improve something. And so at the risk of upsetting them, we made sure that we brought these practices, these laboratories where we tested with metrics that they were proven, to a council meeting where CEOs of business, mayor, chair of county government, and superintendents were all in attendance. And at that table, we created that friction of the people on the ground bringing something forward that they wanted to test and to get funding for. It was something that I've always believed in, which is a lot of the wisdom is from people that are closest to the action. And I think too often government is set up to only do proclamations and policy, but when it comes to implementing, there's such a lack of integrity around being transparent when we fail. And I think that what you'll get in me is I'm very comfortable with that because we have to constantly test and improve. And I think we have so many examples in the city and in the state where we are satisfied with the photo op at the proclamation, but then we seem to disappear 5 years later when the data indicates that we've absolutely made no progress for those priority communities that we all say that we want to lift up. And yeah.
Okay, great. Julia?
So yeah, I've always been very picky about where I'm willing to work, and that's a privilege. It's a privilege to have had a 15-year career in the nonprofit sector and to choose to work at places where I can work on issues that I believe in a way that I believe in. So my independence examples are definitely examples that come through my career and the work that I've done, but these are extensions of definitely, who I am as a person as well and how I would lead. Independent of being an employee of these organizations. So at Food and Water Watch, we really had a strong stance of action. There's no safe way to frack. There's no, we supported a ban on fracking, that regulating it was not good enough. There's no safe way to frack. And this was not kind of like a debatable issue for us. That said, we knew we had to show up at the table in coalitions with groups that had a diversity of perspectives on that. And personally, there was a bill in the state legislature for a very obscure small part of Oregon where fracking was potentially an option. And initially, this bill was a moratorium, and it shifted to being regulation of this fracking. And we had to make the call to go against other members of this kind of very loose network or vague coalition and say, actually, we can't support this bill anymore. And furthermore, we're actually going to fight this bill because regulating fracking sets a very bad standard and implying that you're able to do it safely. And we can't support a bill that does that or sit quietly and let it happen. And through that work and continuing to stay in touch with the other organizations that were working on this bill, ultimately, that bill was scrapped, and the next year we passed a moratorium. So taking that stand actually led to a better outcome, and we did so by continuing to stay in relationship and communications with those folks. And another example of the fracking independence.
One is enough.
Okay,
Thank you.
Right.
That's awesome. I appreciate it. Loretta?
Yeah, I think my independence, Wapato has to be one of the examples that I would bring to mind first, because I argue that Wapato should be used to its fullest extent as a triage center for folks who are homeless and houseless and who have mental health issues. Then I also said we should also keep it because we might have an earthquake one day. And if we have a major emergency, we're going to need at least 22 acres of land, a stable facility. Now, we're in COVID-19 right now. It's not an earthquake, but it certainly is a crisis. And if we had Wapato open, or we had control over Wapato at the county level, we could put folks, instead of putting folks in the convention center, we could put them in Wapato and triage them a whole lot better and a whole lot more. So that's probably my biggest independence. I kind of got beat up a little bit about it, but a lot of folks, they agreed with me.
So while we're on that topic, why do you think the county has remained so resistant to the kinds of uses that you have advocated and that obviously now Jordan Schnitzer is advocating? Why is that?
Well, I think what I was told that, it was far away from services. It didn't have good transportation, but I had talked to TriMet. TriMet said that they could put up additional bus stops and that we could actually move services inside the building to triage folks. And it didn't have to be for long term. It could be for, short term housing. So I guess, I mean, that's what they've told me before. And I'm so glad and happy that Jordan Snitzer, he bought it and he's willing to do something now with it that's going to help folks who are homeless.
Okay, so if the TriMet, if the objection that it was too far away and didn't have any services was not a real answer, not a good answer, what do you think the real answer is? Why do they really not want that building used?
I don't know. Maybe because Loretta Smith said it. I don't know. I just don't know. I don't know. But that's what my colleagues told me. And in fact, just before I had made a decision to run for office, I called Chair Kafori and I said, you know, I'm thinking about running. Can you tell me how I can be helpful to you if I was on city council as it relates to homelessness? Because the reality is there is no one who's done any more for homelessness or houselessness than Deborah other than her mother. So she said, remember, we need those supportive beds with support services and wraparound supports. I said, that's right. We did vote on that and we're 1,200 short. And she said, that's what I would need help on if you're over at the city. I said, okay. You know, so I mean, I'm in support of those supportive services because my dad, he was homeless. He was on drugs for most of his adult life. He was on heroin. And he didn't have access to support services. And then when he finally did get that in 2008, he found out that he had cancer and then he passed away. So had we had those kind of support services that would have allowed somebody like my dad and others to have a place to stay and get themselves together, I think that would have been so helpful. And I think Wapato could still be that kind of a center.
Great, thank you. Margot, independence, and Margot, you can also take a whack at this in a different way, which is that you could tell us a time when you've compromised.
Well, okay.
Either way.
So I mean, I've just never been I'm just a fiercely independent person. I've never jumped on a bandwagon as a professionally trained mathematician and problem solver. I just don't take any ideas for granted, and if I don't form an opinion or take a position until I understand it. So I'm trying to think of just one example because I have so many of them, and it's one of the reasons why I don't have a whole lot of friends and support in sort of the upper echelon political class, because I'm not obedient. I'm not a go along to get along kind of person, but I'm also able to form compromise and let go of things. I just have two really good examples and I'm trying to find one to share. I think this will say more about me. I testified a few years ago for parking limits, or to impose parking limits on developments in Northwest Portland. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to remember the exact legislation. Anyway, it'd be limiting parking. The folks who wanted more parking were very against it. This was a few years ago, and this right as our housing conversations were really starting to develop volume. There was a pretty clear division. Well, I would say as a renters' rights advocate, all the renter people were saying we're all part of the Stop Demolishing Portland effort, and they were just anti all apartments and all new development, and they were very, very anti the parking minimums because they wanted more parking. They saw that as a force of gentrification. And some folks reached out to me to ask if I would, get involved in helping to limit parking in these complexes. And I did. And actually, I believe Rachel wrote an article about it before I knew her very well. And so the independence was really kind of breaking out of what at that time was the mold of the radical renter. To be a radical renter activist, you also had to be anti-supply and anti-development and pro lots of parking. And I didn't, I wasn't sold by that. And so I went to the hearing and I testified. Commissioner Fish actually came to me afterwards to say that he hadn't made his decision on it, and that my testimony actually impacted his decision. And I got a lot of grief from the tenants' rights community, especially those on the far left. I still often get called a YIMBY, which I don't really think is a slur, but in sort of the radical renter community, it can be. And I don't equivocate. I can explain to people why I take the positions that I do, and I'm not afraid I'm not afraid to have the challenging conversations. And to Julia's story about testifying at City Council, and I don't know the details about it. I'm the person who is absolutely going to testify, even if it's going to make some friends of mine mad. I agree that letting them know first is a good idea, but I make it really clear that I'm not, that this is how I feel, and it's the position that I'm going to take. And that if that is going to compromise our relationship, that's disappointing, because I'm accountable not to that relationship, but I'm accountable to the cause and to the people who are impacted by it, and to the the greater good.
Great. Okay, thank you. I think we'll stop there. I think Mark Zussman may have a couple of questions that he would like to ask.
Hi,
Mark,
everybody. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm not so sure this is a question. I in part want to offer all of you who strike me as good people with a lot of shared values, a little bit of insight on how the editorial board makes its decision, which may be of no moment to you. But we're looking for people who can think well and who can execute, but we're also looking for people who are frankly responding to some calling. And I genuinely believe that all 6 of you are in your own way. Here's my concern about what I've heard for the last hour and 10 minutes. I worry that your general's fighting the last war, in that you all started this election with some really legitimate concerns and aspirations about the need to redistribute income in the city to create housing stability and a variety of other really worthy issues. But we're now faced with this public health crisis that is leading to a situation where the city of Portland is going to easily have between 15 and 20% unemployment by December 1st. We're a city that I think, as Tara mentioned, is far more vulnerable to what this country is going through because this is a small business city. There are municipalities across this country that are going to fail and collapse. And it just feels to me like the 6 of you, 5 of you, 6 of you, are not necessarily responding to the fact that the calling is now significantly different. Nonprofits aren't going to have the funds available to them that they had 6 months ago. Small businesses are collapsing. 20% of the workplace are going to be unemployed and taxing. And so the question is, as leaders responding to the calling, what is it that you can do to change to this fluid moment? And I really am telling you this more as an editorial because I don't know that there's time to respond. I will also tell you that one of the things that Nigel and team of reporters here look for are people who can be concise. And maybe I'm just offering a little bit of insight because all of you, I'm sure, have a bright political future in front of you. But to remember that you also have to be willing to pivot when the times demand it. So that was a classic piece of political rhetoric, but you don't necessarily have to respond. Sorry.
Mark, I'd like an opportunity to respond to that because I think I was built for this moment. I was with Senator Wyden for 20 years. I've been with him the last 10 years that I worked for him, I did his appropriations. I was his point person in Multnomah County. I've gone through 3 stimulus packages, got $4 billion in for Head Start and some other projects. And I know how important it is to have people who understand the money piece, who understands how to bring the money home, what questions to ask, and to be able to look at a multi-trillion-dollar budget and not be afraid of it and say, okay, this is where we need to pull some dollars from. This is how we can be helpful. What has helped me and what I've learned this last 15 months that I've been off, I had to start my own business. So I know what it's like when you have very limited resources, and that's what I'm going to be fighting for. I'm going to be fighting for the local small businesses, the family small businesses, because I don't want these businesses to leave Portland. I think that's so important, and to have relationships already on the federal level and to give suggestion. I think that is very important, and you're going to need someone who knows how to bring all of this together on the local, state, and federal side.
I'd like and I've messed up my screen, so hopefully y'all can see me. I agree, and it is a pivot, and it's a pivot that we all need to make. And I think that that's why I, called the budget office this week to find out what our reserve was, and it said $79 million, and start really thinking about what our plan is. It's not just going to be a 6-month plan; it's going to be a 1, 2, 5-year plan, and the city is going to look very different. And I don't think that we can ignore that. And the thing that is the passion that is driving me to run and to run for this seat is to make sure that we are taking care of folks who are experiencing alcohol and drug issues and addiction. And when somebody's ready to get clean and sober, we need to be there for them. And that's going to be exacerbated from this crisis. And that is absolutely going to be needing our immediate attention, as well as our small businesses. It's not a one-trick pony here anymore. We have to have a global perspective of how do we rebuild our city? How do we rebuild our city and bring in the values that we care about and that we know are right? We want to make sure that we have we're investing more in our climate smart technologies. We want to make sure that we are bringing as many small businesses back, and I want to incentivize them, and I want to make sure that we're doing that as fast as possible, because once you close your doors, it's really hard to get back up and running. Similar to being unemployed. Once you're out of the market, it's even harder to get back in. And once you have fallen into homelessness, it's even harder to get back out. So I think that we do have to, it is a different time. And I don't sit here telling you that I have all the answers, because that would be ridiculous. But I have lobbied on behalf of the city, both in the state legislature and in DC, and we will be fighting to get as many dollars here. And it's not just about the dollars to me, it's also about how do we make sure that the barriers aren't there so that folks can access those dollars. Prosper Portland had 11,000 applications in 2 days for that $1 million, and that's obviously not going to work. So we need to, if we have $79 million in a general fund reserve, we need to make sure that we are appropriating those now and not wait to see what happens, right? This needs to be a recovering process that is going to be ongoing, and we need to be flexible, make sure we're holding ourselves accountable on how we spend the money, but also at the same time, make sure that we're being responsible and responsive to folks who are about to slip through the cracks. It's going to be harder to find them and harder to get them back. So that's really where my focus is. I've been pulling together a COVID plan, and I'll tell you that it keeps changing because daily things are changing. But that's the work that we need to do. And I do feel like I know I'm ready. And I know I'm ready because I know what City Hall, I know what I'm getting myself into, not necessarily in a global pandemic, but I understand City Hall. I know how it runs. And I know that, literally on day one, I will know my way around and have the relationship. And that's the most important with our community leaders and our frontline leaders, and with leadership in our state legislature to get this done. So I would talk a little bit.
Step in if I may. I don't know who's thinking, okay, I'm going to talk. Mark, I really like how you phrased it with the generals facing the last war. And I know that as I have been, watching the headlines and experiencing this as everybody else has for the last month now, it does. I mean, I guess I don't really see a vision for the city where things ever get back to normal in terms of what was. And I see we all keep using the words unprecedented to describe everything that's happening. And I think that this is the time for unprecedented leadership, unprecedented ideas, unprecedented solutions. I think, the genie's out of the box, and we're not going to be able to put it back in. And for a lot of Portland, that we don't want to put back in. That what is happening right now is exposing all of our vulnerabilities to the system. And I do want to say also that as a candidate, I have from the very beginning, I have been pivoting and very much responding to this. I've led the charge on an eviction moratorium. Or the state of Oregon now has one of the strongest eviction moratoriums in the entire country, and that is because I wasn't happy with the governor's first, and I spoke with legislators who said, we all thought that it was doing something that it wasn't, and it's only because you actually know the dirty details that got deeper than we are. And the only reason it doesn't look like a pivot is because it was my platform, and then my platform just took new and renewed urgency, and things that I wanted to fight for have become possible that maybe weren't possible before. But I don't think that this is the time for old hands. I think this is the time for people who are qualified and do have experience and do have ideas and vision, but we can't come in this thinking that in 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, anything is going to be back to the way things were. And I don't think
Margot, I'm sorry, I need to interrupt. We have another interview behind this one. We're out of time here. Rachel, can you jump in? You have a quick question?
Yes, we have our fun question at the end for those of you who've done this before. Sorry for the switching my video around as I asked this. Commissioner Smith, we'll start with you. Can you answer our question? For this era, what's the most unusual thing that you've done actually I'm going to change it slightly for the rest of your life that you've done during this social distancing time period?
Social distancing. Oh, guess what? So last week, Friday, I don't know if you all know who Lizzo is, but I just found out about NPR's Tiny Desk concert. So Lizzo was on there, and I'd never seen her live like that. And so I had a Tiny Desk concert that I reached out to my Facebook friends and asked them to watch with me last week Friday. So that was new and different. And I had no idea NPR had these concerts. They have like everybody you want to see. So that was new. Had this not happened, I would have never known about the Tiny Desk concert.
Thank you. Councilor Chase, what's your answer to that question?
I couldn't hear the question.
Okay. What's the most unusual thing you've done during this, or most memorable thing you've done during this time of social distancing that you'll remember for the rest of your life?
Well, I mean, the thing that really stands out for me is forcing, I'm a parent of a blended family. We've got 4 children, 3 teenage girls and a 11-year-old boy. The forcing them to sort of be in a space for this period of time has been, I think, a silver lining that we're going to have out of this for families around the country. And, I'm really excited for this one little piece of what's happened, which is forcing families to really spend that quality time together. And I think it's changing folks' relationships.
Thank you very much. Ms. Black.
Gosh, I feel like maybe I'm just a hermit. That my life hasn't changed for having my kids at home. Although I don't know if this totally qualifies because it's something I've done before, but not quite the same way. I'm bribing my children to really get into a good homework and chore and school routine. And if they satisfy the bribe, then I have offered to either adopt or foster or in some other way intentionally have a female pregnant cat have kittens that then my kids that my kids can then enjoy. Running out of things to do at home, and I don't want them playing Minecraft all the time.
Wait, so you're bribing your kids with a pregnant cat? Did I hear that right?
Not that I actually have a pregnant cat yet. I'm just banking on being able to find one. But I've done kittens many times in my life, but I've never done it like on purpose. And I usually try to make sure that it doesn't happen. So that is new.
Please don't tell my children about the cat ideas, because they've been out looking assertively, and they did an April Fool's. They told me they came home with a cat, and it seems to be a pretty popular idea right now.
Well, we might need to rehome some kittens in a while, Sam. So I'll reach out somehow. Let them.
Anyone who has, please mute yourself if you're not speaking. Ms. DeGraw, what's your answer to most memorable experience of this social distancing era? Something you'll remember for the rest of your life.
What I'll remember for the rest of my life, because most of this stuff is pretty small, frankly, but cumulatively, my household, which is I live with my partner and a roommate and his adorable, lovely, amazing cat, Hot Dog, which is like getting me through all the things. I love that cat so much. And I talk to him way too much. It turns out when I'm home alone and working, that like I will run things by Hot Dog apparently. So, but I want to pretend like that's a like shelter in place thing. It's just gotten heightened since the shelter in place thing has occurred. But I think what's really memorable is that we've become more of a family. You know, my housemate is, every time he goes to the store, he makes sure that he checks in with whatever anyone else might be needing. We're sharing more meals together and quality time together, like I would have done when I was living with my parents when I was a kid, right? It's we've really become people who care for each other in a like daily, how are you doing emotional level, but as well as like breaking bread together and being more than just people who live in the same house together. And I don't think that's going to change after this. I think it's actually shifted how close we are as people and the way that we're going to show up for each other moving forward. And I really kind of appreciate that change, which I wouldn't have even consciously noticed yet had you not asked that question. So thank you, Rachel.
Thank you for the answer. Ms. Hurst, most memorable experience of social distancing.
It's a hard one. So, you know, I'm in a small house, 700 square feet with a 13-year-old boy. So that's memorable in so many ways. And, you know, we've always been really close as kind of mom and son when it's just the two of you are. And we are getting that much more up in each other's business and closeness. So I think that's just going to be something that, for better or for worse, is something that will live with us. And my dogs, who now will not leave my side. So what you've been seeing is me. She doesn't like that I haven't looked at her in like an hour. You know, the memorable thing that my son and I did was we made nachos with flaming hot Doritos, Takis, jalapenos, and cheese, and then binge watch Shameless, which is probably not something I should say to anybody. But that's, you know, that's the kind of stuff we're doing over here. I wish I was a math teacher at home, and Margot, I'm so jealous to not have that kind of brain, but that's how we're surviving. And I don't drink. So, you know, we're surviving with flaming hot Doritos.
Thank you.
My 12-year-old tried to put on deodorant yesterday for the first time. Just a little like, you know, 12, 13-year-old boy mom relating there.
And I think my last answer is Mr. Ryan.
Yeah, hi. I would say when my lover's birthday was about a week ago, and they were doing a performance for their friends or a musician, and I like totally screwed it. I walked in on the performance and blocked some of I was a technical mishap. And then going out at 7 o'clock in my block with my neighbors has been so heartwarming, and I'll never forget that. And I'll say also, I've completely fallen in love with Stephen Colbert. I just didn't stay up that late. For some reason of late, the way he delivers information, the way he explains what's going on is just so brilliant and funny. And anyway, I'm all into Stephen Colbert now. So those are the three things I'll remember.
Well, thank you.
One other thing I would just throw in there as a idea for other parents out there is, I'm not sure it lands in the category of good parent or bad parent, but I've been teaching my kids poker and they've become pretty darn good at it. And I think it's a good lifelong skill. Wouldn't have done that if we hadn't had all this quality time together.
Well, thank you all very much for participating, and the endorsement issue will be out the last week of this month. So good luck to all of you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.